This video is sponsored by Babbel, the #1 language learning app in the world with more than 10 million subscriptions worldwide. Even if you won't be traveling anytime soon, it can never hurt to learn a new language, even just for mental stimulation. And whether you're looking to learn casual conversation or perhaps something more complex, Babbel has you covered. And that's because while other language learning apps might use AI or algorithms, Babbel features lessons built by hundreds of language experts and even has examples voiced by actual native speakers. On top of this, just in case you want to dive deeper into your chosen language, Babbel also features hours of free content, from podcasts to fun language and linguistics explainer articles and videos. For a limited time, get 65% off a Babbel subscription by clicking the link in the description box down below. Thank you, Babbel, for sponsoring this video and independent content on YouTube, and with that said, let's begin. If you're a regular viewer on this channel, then you're probably wondering why I'm even covering this topic, so let me explain. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting around stewing in the chaos that is modern-day America, wondering how conspiracy theories became so mainstream. I thought back to the good old days when conspiracy theories were mostly harmless, and that's when I thought, whatever happened to the whole cattle mutilation thing that used to happen in like the 60s? You know, the whole phenomenon where farmers would find their cows dead, supposedly killed, and subsequently dismembered by any number of things ranging from aliens all the way to cults. To answer this question, I sought the knowledge of elders, which these days means a quick search on google.com, and what I found really wasn't what I was expecting. First off, my idea that this phenomenon was a product of the past was actually wrong. I went to Google expecting the first several results to be fun write-ups looking back at the goofy idea that extraterrestrial beings might have an unusual interest in our bovine brethren, but instead I found stuff like this. These articles are incredibly recent, with stuff like rancher reports mutilated cow and the ominous detail, not one drop of blood. And I assume that this applies to everyone else too, thought that these things weren't still going on, or at least that they'd been debunked to the point where people no longer believe that there was anything fishy happening. Again, I was wrong. And after that initial Google search, I also discovered that at one point the FBI got involved in all this. Yeah, I know. But anyway, before I explain the FBI's involvement in all of this, let's take a step back. When exactly did this phenomenon start, and what are its characteristics? If we're strictly going for the term cattle mutilations, then we can assume that technically it's been going on as long as agriculture itself. Newspaper archives from as far back as the 1800s mention the mutilation of cattle, both unsolved and with explanation, and I'm sure records from before that would mention similar instances as well. If we're talking about modern history, however, then we might be able to attribute the cattle mutilation phenomenon to one specific unsolved death. That of a horse by the name of Lady. Lady lived on a ranch in Colorado up until she was found dead by her caregiver in 1967. According to Alamosa News, the caregiver found Lady on her side with her head, quote, stripped bare to the bone. The cuts were described as precision and not being the result of the chewing and gnawing of animals such as coyotes. Even stranger, a potent chemical odor said to be similar to acetone surrounded the area. And somehow, no blood was found at the scene. Once the story made its way to the public, it became infamous, and the Alamosa News claims that both visitors and locals alike began reporting strange phenomena, usually involving being stalked by what they described as strange objects. Of course, there's much more to the story here, but for the sake of getting back to the topic at hand, I'm just going to let that go for now and say that the takeaway here is that the story of Lady is a pretty good example of most cattle mutilation claims. In nearly every case, a farmer will claim to have found any number of cattle dead with cuts made to the body that seem almost surgical in nature. Oftentimes, this will also involve the removal of the animal's sex organs or other soft tissue, and keep in mind, somehow this all happens without any blood being left at the scene. In 2019, it was like deja vu. 5 bulls were found dead in Oregon, and according to NBC News, quote, there was no indication it had been shot, attacked by predators, or eaten poisonous plants. The animal's sex organs and tongue had also been removed. All the blood was gone. Now, these are the base attributes of this phenomenon, and with all that said, how common is it actually? My initial assumption about cattle mutilations was that it was the result of a few isolated cases, and the rest were either embellishments or straight up folklore. But nope, I was wrong again, sort of. There obviously isn't a centralized cattle mutilation reports archive, but there were definitely more than just the few cases I initially expected. Pinning down just how many, however, is when problems arise. If you look into news reports alone, you're bound to find dozens, even hundreds of cases, but some other sources will claim that that number is as high as 10,000 over the last several decades. Keep in mind, that's just an estimate, and I will add that it tends to be a commonly parroted number amongst less credible sources, so take that with a grain of salt. A couple hundred to several thousand is obviously a massive discrepancy, so it is worth noting that this isn't a uniquely American thing. In 2018, an Australian couple found one of their cows dead, and yes, you guessed it, it had its udder, ears, and tongue seemingly surgically removed. Last year, the BBC reported on incidents of cattle mutilation in France where, again, things such as ears and genitals had been removed from the animals, and by the time of the report, 150 cases were being actively investigated by local authorities. Like I said earlier, the FBI did get involved in investigating cattle mutilations in the US, specifically in the late 70s, which is hilarious to think about. To this day, the FBI website lists animal mutilations under unexplained phenomena, and even provides documents relating to their investigation. One of the first bits of correspondence features a letter to the FBI from then Nebraska Senator Carl T. Curtis regarding, quote, a series of incidents stretching from Oklahoma to Nebraska in which cattle have been dismembered in some kind of strange witchcraft cult. There were questions about whether or not the FBI should even be investigating something like this, whether it was their department or not, but Senator Curtis wasn't the only member of government asking for the organization's involvement. Despite all this, however, the investigation was ultimately inconclusive. Certain reports pushed the idea of these mutilations being the result of natural predation based on veterinary testimony, and in the end, that's more or less what the FBI stance ended up being. The logic here being that the animal died naturally, which is the thing that happens, and then decomposition, along with various insects, caused the soft tissue, i.e. tongues, eyes, sex organs, etc., to go first. As for the lack of blood, science would traditionally explain that with gravity, since once your heart stops, there's nowhere for your blood to go but down, pooling within the confines of the corpse. There was also never any solid evidence connecting these events to any kind of cult, and investigators weren't exactly entertaining the more outlandish theories. Still, it's amusing to think that this whole thing even made it that high up the ladder, but of course, if we consider the economic aspect and how expensive livestock can get, then it actually makes a fair bit of sense. So, where does this leave us? Technically speaking, cattle mutilations to this very day are considered unsolved, both by the FBI, like I said, and as a cultural phenomenon. If you ask around, people will swear up and down that they have the definitive answer to why these things occur, be it aliens, cults, El Chupacabra, government experimentation, or just plain animal cruelty or natural death. And yes, people still do believe in the cults or aliens angle in 2021. Normally, I'd probably be the type to be a smartass and poke fun at the people who think that ET is doing this, but you know what? I'm not going to do that. We live in a world where people believe far crazier shit these days, so yeah, I support the aliens all day. But taking it back for a second, I just want to close this out by saying that given the sheer amount of cases and just how widespread they are, there isn't any one answer. In case you've never heard of it, the one-cause fallacy is when we take a complex issue and assign it a singular cause, when in reality it's probably attributed to a number of different factors. What I mean is, sure, maybe someone back in the 70s killed a cow because they thought that they were going to summon a demon. This doesn't mean that the next case wasn't a completely natural death with decomposition as its culprit. Hell, cow tipping is apparently a thing amongst bored rural kids, so maybe that has to do with it too, who knows. Maybe the aliens were the ones actually tipping cows. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're still listening, then you are amazing, but not as amazing as these specific people. T. Gorman, Connor H., Base of Shadow, WH, Zuicha Zales, Ronnie, TBF, Saul A., Michelle G., Guilty Pleasures, Corey Barks, David G., Catherine L., KM, BK Ketchup, PDG, Astro, Tyler T., Bloody the Elf, Amelia J., Andrew L., Esper Nix, Sean the CHB, Eric M., Brandon F., Val C., Danielle G., AJ Runaway, Corey W., Lance Ulysses, Daniel P., Mega Brutal, Sean C., Eddie, Terry the Outlaw, Sebastian N., Jace, Kyle R., Layla R., Bathtime Duck, Zimbledorf the Calzone Consumer, Rye S., Francisco B., Sky Grinder, It's Mitt, YOLO for Jesus, Luck B., Scorian S., Benjamin M., Nick B., Melody S., PC, Zippo, Keith Z, Matt J, James M, Zerai, and Tiago P. Thank you all so much for your support, and I'll see you all again soon.